Hey, good morning. We are doing today the Gemara on Ches Amud. We're starting at the last line on Ches Amud Aleph. Amar Rav Huna Bar Yehuda Amar Rabbi Ami. Rav Huna Bar Yehuda says the name Rabbi Ami. Lo Elam Yashlam Adam Parshiyot V'Mat Tibor Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum. A person should do Shnai Mikra with the Tibor V'Afilu Ataros V'Divayin. Even words like Ataros V'Divayin, as Rashi explains, that don't have any Targum. Why? Why should a person do Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum? Shekol Hamashlam Parshiyot V'Mat Tibor Marichan Layama V'Shnei. A person who does Shnai Mikra is going to have a long life. Remember yesterday on Ches Amud Aleph we said a mimer from Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rabbi Shua ben Levi said to his son, "Kadim v'chashichu v'adol beiknesh." You should get up early and go to shul in the morning, and also go to shul at night. So you should be able to live long. This is another one of these good adages, another one of these good ideas. In order to be able to have a long life, a person should say Shnayim Mikra Ve'echad Targum. Before we go any further, let's do a few of these tesis then. So the first tesis starts down on Ches Amud Aleph on the bottom. Shnayim Mikra Ve'echad Targum. Tesis says Yesh Mefarshim V'Adin Loy as Dois Belaz. So one of you have somebody they speak English, so there should be, bless you, they should be saying over the parsha, the way they should do it is with the English, right? That would be Havi K'moy Targum Shem Mefarish Lefam. That would be something like Targum. Ki K'moy Targum, the same way that the Targum is going to be Mefarish for those who are speaking Aramaic. They'll understand from their English, whatever their language is. It says no. It's not Targum, it's not just simply a translation. That's missing what Targum is. Targum is not just simply a translation, it also is teaching you certain things. Famous Ramban, Parashas Vayigash, when the Pasuk is telling us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying to Yaakov Avinu, I'm going to come down with you to Mitzrayim. So over there, the Targum plays around a little bit with the Hebrew in terms of the way it's written. In a very long Ramban, the Ramban explains that this is the genius of Targum Onkelos we're talking about. The Rambam also in the Moreh Nevuchim talks amazingly about the Targum Onkelos. And the thing that they're both discussing, the topic is anthropomorphisms, areas where the Targum Onkelos is essentially changing what it would sound like in the pasuk in order to accord with the philosophical idea that the Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't have any physical manifestations. So it continues on the Tosfos. So you might think now that a person who speaks English, right, for them Aramaic is not going to be helpful at all. So maybe they should say the Shnai Mikra, maybe they should do the Targum instead of doing it in Aramaic, in the Targum Onkelos, they should do it in English. So Tosfos is saying no, because we learn out from the Targum many, many things that will be missing if you're just simply having a translation. This is another There's something very specifically unique about doing it in Targum, and the specific unique thing that you're doing is that you're actually learning out things. It's not just simply translating. If you're right, if it was just about translation, then in theory English would be the same as any other language. But this is not just about translation. It is also about the ability to learn something out of it. Even Ataris V'Divan. What is this big benefit of telling you words like Ataris V'Divan? The pasuk there says Ataris V'Divan V'Yazem Nimra V'Cheshbon Be'el Lev V'Vam Nevayu V'Ayin. What does that have to do with it? When you need a Targum for that? No, She'en by Targum. There's no Targum over there. So Tosfos points out what Rashi means to tell you when he's saying Ataris V'Divan that has no Targum, that you're essentially reading it 3 times in the Hebrew. There's no Targum. The Kasha for Tosfos, Amay Nokat Ataris V'Divan, Sheyesh Lamikol Mokim Targum Yerushalmi. So Tosfos asks on Rashi, well, even if there's no Targum Onkelos, there is a Targum Yerushalmi. Again, Targum Yonasan Mazil, Megillah, and Gimel Amal tells us that the Targum Yonasan was on Nevi'im, so we're calling this other Targum Yerushalmi. So Tosfos is pointing out that Ataris V'Divan, even if it doesn't have Targum Onkelos, it's just repeating the Hebrew. But when it comes to the Targum Yerushalmi, there is a Targum for these words. So Mikamakim Targum Misham Ha'Elam Reuven V'Shimon or Psuk Echrin Shem by Targum Klal. So Tesis is asking, Rashi telling you there's no Targum, but that's not a good explanation because there is a Targum Yerushalmi. So for Tesis should have picked out words like Reuven, right, or other Psukim that have no Targum, not in the Onkelos and not in the Yerushalmi. So why didn't the Gemara use one of those as an example and say even those words you still have to read in the Targum? You still have to say Shnai Mikveh Echad Targum, even though the Targum is going to be exactly the Hebrew. So Tesis explains, that's why specifically we said Ataris for Divine, even though it doesn't have a Targum of Unkelus, El Targum Yerushalmi, it only has a Targum Yerushalmi. V'tzarech likros gimel pa'am ha'ivri. Mikol mokem yeser toiv likros pam shlishas b'targum. So the Tesis is telling us that the reason that the Gemara was specific about saying Ataris for Divine, which doesn't have Targum Unkelus, it only has Targum Yerushalmi. What's the big benefit? The big benefit is as follows: that even though it hasn't got a regular Targum Onkelos, it only has a Targum Yerushalmi. Mitzarach likos gimel pa'am ha'ivri mikol makom yisitav likos pam shlishis b'targum. So instead of reading it 3 times straight, the same thing, when you have a word like a Torah Shadiva and it doesn't have Targum Onkelos, but has Targum Yerushalmi, use the Targum Yerushalmi. That's the test. What happens if it's a word that doesn't have it? So meaning, let's say Ruvain, right? Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, right? Let's say, for example, Parsh Vayigash, we're naming all the names. So the people that came down to Mitzrayim. So there's no Targum Onkelos, there's no Targum Yerushalmi. It's just exactly the same. So Rabbi Yana brings down 2 days. There, either you just say Shnai, Mikra, you don't have to say, there's no Echad Targum, it's all the same. Another day is nevertheless, you're still supposed to read it 3 times. But this is the Taisus explaining what is the reason that the Gemara used words like Ataris Divad instead of using words like Reuben Shimon, because again, for practical intents, switch from your Targum Onkelos to Targum Yerushalmi in those situations. Well, one more Taisus before we go back to the Gemara, and that is Yashlim Parshi Yosef Imatzibu. You have to skip a Taisus. You have to skip the Ki'ilu, the next Taisus after that. So what does it mean Yashlim Parshi Yosef Imatzibur? So the Taisus explains Nira the Kol Shavua Mechaben. What we're talking about is what how do you do Targum Onkelos? Like when is the time that you do Shnai Mikveh Echad Targum? The Taisus explains near the Chol Shavua Mechaben. We're talking about the whole week. Now we should know that with regards to certain halachas, the week seems to start, let's say, on a Wednesday, right, or ends on a Tuesday, right? Think about Havdalah or get the different things, but for the purposes of Shnai Mikra, the whole week is considered that week, right? The whole week is considered the week of the Shabbos. So you start on Sunday near the Kol Hashua Mechavin, the Maschil and Likros that parsha, the Hainu Minchas Shabbos, because we already consider that parsha of the week when from that Shabbos Mincha, right? The Shabbos Mincha before we already started laying for that week. So therefore, that would be considered the time that you could start saying the Shnai Mikra. Ad Shabbos Haba, Nikras and Matzibur. That's all considered being reading the Shnai Mikra V'Echad Targum and doing that with the Tzibur. And then Tesis finishes up and he brings down a medrash. Rabbeinu HaKadosh said 3 things to his children when he died. It's funny because the Gemara in Ksubas Kuf Gimel, the Gemara tells us there that Rebbe said 4 things to his kids when he was about to pass away. He said many things over there. The whole Gemara, the Kuf Gimel, Kuf Tal, the Gemara tells us. But among the things that he said, there was Zar B'Kvoid Imchem, right? You have to make sure to be taking care of your mother. Again, famous question, what do you mean? Your mother, they have Kibbutz, they don't need him to tell them. Or maybe it was a stepmother, fine. But also you have to have the bed be kept appropriately, the lamp appropriately, the table appropriately, all the 3 things. This is a different version or vision of what Rebbe was saying at his deathbed. A new point that he mentioned that Rebbe told his kids. 3 things that he commanded his kids when he was dying. Right? You should not be eating lunch until you finish Shnai Mikra. And then Taisus continues, and Sarah says, you have to be finished before lunch. And nevertheless, if somebody is not able to finish before lunch, so even after lunch, it's fine. Nevertheless, it's still best to do be done with it before lunch. Just to mention when it says in the Shulchan Aruch, in Archaim, in Siman Reish Pei Hey, the Mechaber writes as follows: even though a person hears the laning on Shabbos, right? And the tzibur, when he hears the laning, nevertheless, nevertheless, you still have to say Shnai Mikra on your own, and even words like Ataris Divine. Now we have the famous addition to this, which is in Lomar Parsha Pirush Rashi, Choshev K'may Targum. If you learn with Rashi, that's considered like Targum, right? So even though Taisus had told us that what's the bigger boost that would say at Torah V'Divan and not Reuben V'Shimon was because the Torah V'Divan has a Targum Sham, you should say that. Right, and even though there was a special limudim from Targum that doesn't work with Laz or any other translations because Targum's teaching you things. So what's Rashi? Rashi obviously is giving you the best explanation of the Chumash, and he's adding in all the things that you need to understand. So therefore, if somebody cannot do Aramaic, it doesn't work for them. They're not learning anything from it. Such a person is able to do Chumash with Rashi. That is going to count as though it's Targum. However, says the Mechaber, v'yorei shamayim mikra targum, v'gam pirush Rashi. Right? Someone's yorei shamayim. Do shnayim mikra targum, and you should do with Rashi as well. And when does it start? As we just said in Taisus, miyam rishon ve'elech choshev mitzvah. It starts out from Sunday, right? Because already that Shabbos by mincha before we already start learning that next parsha. Mitzvah and amuvcha shiyash moisa kodem sheyecha b'Shabbos, like we just saw in Taisus, the mitzvah to finish it before you start the lunch meal on Shabbos. You haven't really until mincha that day to do so. And some say you have until the next week, until Wednesday. And those that say even until Shmini Atzeres, the Hainus of Chastera, because then we're really finishing the whole entirety of the Torah. That's why sometimes you see people in Simchas Torah, they're like mamash rushing to finish up Shnayim Mikra. You could do Shnai Mikra during laning. Again, not missing the lane. What we're talking about is either in those days where they used to do, right, and you go to a Yemenite shul, they still do that, right, to some degree, right? I'm not sure if all Yemenite shuls, but some Yemenite shuls, they still have where they lane the pasuk and then they say over the Targum, right? It's a very long laning. I don't recommend it, but it's something to see once in a lifetime. So if somebody who's with that is with them in shul, so you're listening, and you could also be going along with them in terms of maybe not Shnai Mikra, but at least Echad Mikra, Echad Targum, you'd be able to do easily. Being Ervel Gavra, obviously, instead of schmoozing with people to do Shnai Mikra, that's okay as well. One additional point is that the Mechaber says, if someone is teaching the kids the parsha of the week, so he doesn't have to do Shnai Mikra. Why? Because of the fact that he is saying it over always to the kids. He doesn't have to do Shnai Mikra, he's great teaching them, but he still has to do Echad Targum, because that he probably is not doing with them. Okay, so that is the basic halacha over here. The Gemara then says a story. Rabbi Barabai, a third time in Brachos. So what did he want to do? Savar lashlaminu leparshus the kula shas of Mal Yom Kippur. He liked to finish the Mal Yom Kippur, right? Erev Yom Kippur, he liked to do b'mashlam his Shnai Mikra Echad Targum. Everybody remembers the Gemara. We did this in the sugyas that we were doing in the beginning, right? When we did the whole sugya of Ma'asalai, maybe I think we touched on the Gemaras before on in Samach Beis and Ksubas. The Gemara says different rabbis, they would only come to visit their wives in Malad Yom Kippurim, right? Meaning they would come home once a year on Yom Kippur. Effectively, that meant that they were staying away and just being totally devoted to their learning. So Rabbi Barabaya, Malad Yom Kippur, and Erev Yom Kippur, you know what he would do? Finish up his Shnai Mikra. So the Gemara says, Tanile Chiyab Ma'arav Midifti, Ksiv, V'nisam Es Nafshi Seichem, the Torah tells you that you're supposed to be fasting when on the 9th day at the evening. What do you mean the 9th day at the evening? Meaning because that's going to be Yom Kippur. The 10th of Tishrei is Yom Kippur. So at the 9th in the evening is when you start fasting. But the Gemara doesn't read it that way. The Gemara reads it as right? So in the Sishal HaChodesh, you're fasting. When are you fasting on the 9th? You're not fasting on the 9th, you're fasting on the 10th. The teacher that somebody who's fasting on the 9th is as somebody who's eating on the 9th, it's as though he fasted on the 9th and on the 10th. Again, this is a bit of a drash. What is the point of Rav Midifti telling Rabbi Barabaya? He's telling him, what are you supposed to be doing in every Yom Kippur? You're not supposed to be doing Shnai Mikveh time. You're supposed to be eating. Obviously, if it's not mafriya the eating or the like, and clearly it was a situation. Look on the slide in the Mishpat tells you why did baby not do the Shnai Mikveh mimashlim in the Metzibor in the normal week to week in the regular way? Because he was very busy. He was tired. He had no time. So he had no time. He was very busy. Whatever it was, the shiurim, the public, he had no time. So that's why he had to do it. But in theory, a person should do it ideally week to week. If he doesn't have the time, he have until as the B'chab writes, until Shmini Atzeres. Rabbi Bar was doing it every Kippur. Presumably, Rav Midifti was not happy with it because he didn't see him eating. But if somebody's able to manage all the eating and also to be able to do this because he didn't have time before, and then obviously with the Evan will be no issue. Tesis points out a question in the Tesis of Ki'ilu Masana. Tesis asks a question: What about we have a pasuk in Chumash by Pesach? The pasuk says Barisha Ba'ar B'Asiyam L'Chodesh B'Erev Teichlu Matzos. Right. So why don't you ask? Why don't you say the same thing? Barisha and Ba'ar B'Asiyam L'Chodesh B'Erev Teichlu Matzos. So why don't you say that there's a mitzvah to be eating matzah on the 14th? And we know what does the Yerushalmi say? Somebody who's having matzah on the 14th is what? It's like he's being boil his arusa b'veis chama, right? It's not allowed to do that. Matzah is the only one that comes out Pesach, only on the 14th, right? When it turns into the 15th at night. The Torah says the difference between these two psukim. If you look at the pasuk of by Pesach, it says Barishain be'arba asar yom lachodesh ba'erev toichlu matzos. So when is the coming up eating of the matzos? After it already says ba'erev toichlu matzos. Right? I already told you the 14th ba'erev at night of the 14th, then toichlu matzos. So you wouldn't make a mistake of thinking that you would be eating matzah during the day of the 14th. But when it comes out the pasuk. V'nisem es nafshei seichem b'sisha l'chodesh ba'erev me'erev ad erev tishbesu shabbatchem. V'nisem takes place before ba'erev. So you would have thought that maybe the inui has to start right on the 9th itself, right? V'nisem l'chodesh ba'erev. V'nisem l'chodesh ba'erev takes place before the v'nisem takes place before it says the word erev, and therefore. You might have thought that even on the 9th day, you have to fast as well. Okay, and therefore we're coming out with the drasha that says, no, you don't have to fast, but it's like you fasted if you eat on the 9th day. Okay, continues the Gemara. The Gemara, we're at the dot now. The Gemara says, Savar lak duminu. So Rabbi Bar, he's not having any of this, right? You tell him that he can't do a Ma'al Yom Kippurim because he has to be eating. So you know what he's going to do? He's going to chaplap it very quickly. Sadako Parshas b'Shabbos Achas b'Shtei Shabbos. He's going to just read it. He's going to make a Shabbos of Shnai Mikra and just read all the Parshas, right? He's going to do it early, but not do week to week. He's just going to manage to do everything ahead of time. So Amalei Usava, again, somebody comes after him, some older gentleman says to him, no. Panina Levat Shaloya Aktim, Shaloya Ache. You shouldn't be doing it too early or too late. You should be Mashlim Imatzibur, means don't try to rush it and do all the parashas at once, and don't wait till the end and do all the parashas right before the end of the year. Rav Shimon Levi said to his sons, again, we already mentioned before what he said to his sons about coming to shul in order to have a long life. So here another thing he says to his sons, you should make sure to be mashlim the parashas in Matzibor, week to week. When you're shechting birds, make sure you are really cutting to the jugular to take out all the blood. Right? This is also brought down Mechaber Yarden in 7 o'clock days. That you have to be very careful, and maybe even if it wasn't done, you have to take off something because the bird would normally be roasted or as one, right? It was one piece because it's so small. Maybe not the condor. I don't know if that would be a kosher bird or not, but on a regular kind of a bird, it's a small thing. So therefore, you have to make sure that all the blood's coming out. So therefore, you have to be bizarre with a reading in a way that you wouldn't necessarily have to buy another animal. The Tanakh of reading. Buddha's makbid that you have to be sheikh from the reading even on a bird. And another thing that Rabbi Shimon Levi told his kids is you have to be careful with a zaken that forgot his learning. Machmas Einis. Rashi says, what does it mean? The Machmas Einis. Rashi says 2 types of possibilities. Either he got ill, shachala, or he was so busy trying to support himself So he wasn't able to learn. So he forgot his learning. You have to still give him covet. Why? Because both the luchais and the shivrei luchais were in the aron, right? The broken luchais, the measure broke. They didn't go to the garbage. They were kept in the aron. The same way you kept the broken luchais in the aron, the same way you keep Talmud Chacham who no longer remembers his learning. You still give him covet. Again, only in a situation where it's machmas einzay. If it was deliberate, it was a pshia on his part. He wasn't careful, it was negligent, he didn't study when he could have studied, that's a different story. We're talking about somebody, machmas einzay, had this situation. Okay, continues the Gemara. Amalu Rava Livnei. Rava said to his kids, so we already said Rishub and Levi, he says to his kids, and now we have Rava. So what did he say? When you're cutting meat, don't cut it on your hand, right? Big musadig vard. Why shouldn't you cut it on your hand? Because of the fact that what might happen, right? The Gemara says, "Ikadamim shem sakana, ikadamim shem kilkul suda." It could be he was saying because of sakana, right? As Rashi says, if you're going to cut on your hand, you're going to have a sakana. What's the sakana? Shelo yakutz yadei. That you shouldn't cut off your hand. Right, but the igad amsham kilkul sud. It's not a word that we're afraid you're going to cut off your hand. We're afraid it's going to be make a disgusting meal. Why? Because Abba Chabura Katana says Rashi Yotzadam. Right? What's going to happen is you make a little cut in your hand. You're going to bleed. It's going to go into the food. Everyone's going to be grossed out. So don't do gross things. Right? This is the word of Rav. Rav is telling his kids, don't cut meat on your hand, either because potentially you might get hurt, or you shouldn't gross people out at the meal. Another thing that Rava said, don't sit on the bed of an aramis. We're going to have to explain what that means in a minute. And don't go behind the shul when the shul is davening. Again, we're going to have to explain what that means also. So again, three things Rava said. Number one, don't cut meat on your hand. Number two, don't sleep on the bed of an aramis. And three, don't go behind the shul when the tzibur is davening. So now the Gemara is going to take these apart. What does it mean by alteshal mitas aramis? Don't sleep on the bed of an aramis. What does aramis here mean? As Rashi says, we're not saying it means a little aramis. It means go to sleep without saying Shema. Kriya Shema lamita. But like Kriya Shema shetei mitascha daim lamitas aramis. Now your bed will be like a bed of an aramis if you didn't say Kriya Shema. I think you could read this as Rashi saying, don't, or as Rav is saying, apologies, that you should not go to bed before you say Shema, right? Meaning when you go to sleep, say Kriya Shema Lamita. Doesn't mean to say Kriya Shema Al Hamita. Can you say it literally on the bed? Yeah, it sounds like that. But I thought about it. I didn't check to see if the Meiri says anything, but I was thinking about the Meiri. Remember we did the Meiri before. And the Meiri said that Kriya Shema Alamita shouldn't literally be Alamita. It's not appropriate. People are not dressed. And we say no. We say you can say it, but it's all just for the mazik. It's not really a mitzvah. They're just doing it. And that's the first parsha is enough, etc. So we don't say what the Meiri said, but the Meiri said a person should say Kriya Shema Alamita Samach Lamita. He should be next to his bed while he's standing and thinking about it and having real kavana. That was the Meiri. I was wondering if this could be a ride to the Meiri. That what does it mean? I'll get Peshu Alamita Saramis. Don't lie down without Kriya Shema. In other words, say your Kriya Shema before you lie down. Maybe this will be a stickler ride to the Meiri. Anyhow, that's the first understanding of what it means. What's the second one? The second one is don't marry a Giyaris. I thought I would mention over here, why shouldn't somebody be marrying Giyaris? We're having more in Yavamis on Mem Zayin. We more explains that it's a few places in Shas, more Nida, also more in Kedushin. Kashim Gerem Kisapachas. Right, Gerem are very difficult for the Jewish people, like Tzaratz, right? Kisapachas. So what's the problem with them? So Rashi says two possibilities: either Shaykh Masem or Rishonim V'Loim Yisrael Mehem, or Yisrael Chanaleim B'Isser V'Heter. Right, either because they keep on doing what they used to do. In other words, they haven't really changed. They're still doing the same inappropriate activities. Maybe when they were a non-Jew, it was appropriate, it was fine. But now, as a Jew, it's absolutely inappropriate. They keep on doing it. That's one option. Number two, they don't know much, right? And so since they don't know much, even if they mean well, they're going to be not following halacha correctly. And people are going to be relying on them and saying, oh, this must be okay if they're doing it. And so you're going to end up learning things from them that are not appropriate. Those are two possibilities of Rashi. But I wanted, it was much more exciting to tell you a Taisus. Taisus and Ksubas on the Ayanam base. Taisus goes through a whole arichas. So what does it mean? Kashim Gerim Sapachas. He brings down Rashi, has other pshatim, and then he in this long arichas he says as follows: V'yesh mefarshim the koshin gem nisokas apachas levisha hizra kodesh baruch alem mechav dal mekemes shaloi lehainus oisam. The Torah is very, very makbid on a nos devarim by a ger. You have to be very careful not to hurt a ger's feelings. For 24 places, the Torah is makbid warning you not to mistreat a ger. You know why you shouldn't marry a ger? Very easy to mistreat her, right? It's going to be equal to hurt her feelings, not just like we say from Chazal about being the Gemara says about Mitzvah that a person has to be careful about the feelings of his wife and be very careful about that. But it's like times two or squared, cubed, because if she's a Gyaris, not only have to be worried about your feelings of her as a wife, but now you have to be doubly worried, triply worried because of the feelings of the person who's a Gyaris. You have to be very, very sensitive to somebody who is a Ger. And if you recall the other day, I mentioned to you about Rabbi Motun, the vart about Mutter Liskaris B'Sham Ban Mazel, and we talked about Rabbi Schleira, we talked about Rabbi Avi Shalom, Rabbi Mizmodah B'Rachim Rav Shom Banat. I was showing you that sometimes you have the name, you have to remember a shita. This Taisus is one of those beautiful places where in the Taisus you have a shita that you will never forget. The Taisus brings down another pshat of what it means kashmir game kisapachas v'harab Avram Ger. Taisus brings down from one of the Balei Taisus, Avram the Ger. What does he say? And of course, it's like we call it in the business world when the traders speak their book. When you see sometimes a trader, he says screaming something, he has a risk on this position. That's why he's screaming it. It doesn't mean lishma. He has a risk on the position. That's why he's so strong about it. What does Rabbeinu Avram the Ger say? Right? He says, you know why it's kashim gem p'sapachas? Levishagerin bekiyin b'mitzvahs u'medaktin b'hem. Kashim hen lisor kisapachas l'miter kach HaKadosh Baruch Hu mazkar b'neseim shel Yisrael k'she'ein oiser mitzvayinoi. The Gerim, they studied 2 years before they got their rabbinic approval to become a Ger. They became a big expert. They know more than you. And you know what happens when they're keeping the halacha better than you? It's going to be a bad look for you, for the Jewish people. Hashar's brother's been looking at this Ger. You only grew up with this a couple of years, and he's already better than you. And you're such a lazy person about these halachas. So it comes out bad look for you. So all these are possible reasons about what it means that the Gerim are difficult. And I, like I say, wonder if when Rav is telling his kids not to marry a Ger, it's in part thinking about what is the dangers or the challenges of marrying somebody who's a Ger. I should also point out that if you look in Even Ezer, some base, Mechaber writes, in terms of your hierarchy of values of what you should be looking for when you get married, first you're supposed to be looking to marry somebody who's the daughter of a Talmid Chacham. What happens if Loy Mata about Talmid Chacham? Loy Mata doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It means also what happens if you didn't get along with the Talmid Chacham's daughters who are in your town, right? So then what's your next option? Yisa Bas Gedolei Adar. Gedolei Adar doesn't have the same meaning as we have it today. It means here a wealthy person, an important person in the town. Loy Mata Bas Gedolei Adar. Yisa Bas Rosh Knessia is again also an important personage, but not necessarily as great as that. Loy Mata Bas Rosh Knessia. Yisa Bas Gabei Tzedakah. Again, also an important person, maybe not the most important, but in the hierarchy, that's the kinds of people that you should marry. Is people that are dealing with the tzibur, people who are trusted by the tzibur. And you shouldn't be marrying somebody who's the daughter of an Amaret. And what's the reason for that? Because we say, as the Ramah points out, what do we say about the daughters of Amaret? Ar Shechev and Behema. If you have an Amaretz who is medactic in the mitzvahs, whatever he knows, that's a different story. And that would then give you a hierarchy of values about whom to marry, which again could have been part of Rava's idea of not to marry a Gieris, because what is the schus of this over here, as we'll see later on in the Gemara, even Chav Sinai and Beis, when they had deposed Rabbi Gamliel, and they're now looking to figure out who to put in place. So one of the people they thought about was Rabbi Akiva. And they say he can't be Rabbi Akiva. He doesn't have schus avos, even though he's not a ger himself. He has generations before. He doesn't have schus avos because of the fact that he's descended from ger. Okay. Continues the Gemara. We are in the beginning of the intermediate wide line, right? So the Gemara says V'ikid the Ami. So a third shot. The first shot was led to Guna B'lei Kriya Shema. Second shot was led to Nasu L'Giyurda. Aramis mamish. We mean literally in Aramis. Don't sleep, don't lie down on the bed of any Aramis, meaning a Geisha woman. Mishum Ma'aseh Rav Papa, because of the story of Rav Papa. We don't have the full story of Rav Papa over here. We have to look at on the side of the Rav Nissim Gun, the Mafteach. So he talked about what happened. What happened was Ma'aseh Shayla Rav Papa. What happened to Rav Papa? What had happened was is that he had made a loan to an Aramis, and he was going to collect the loan. And when he comes to the house now to collect, she's saying, "I'm going to pay you back. Come to my house, and I'll give it to you." So we go back to the Gemara in here. I should just mention that Rav Nissim Gun at the end of this piece. He says, "V'zeh ma'isa b'kabalu." He says, "I got this ma'isa in a tradition." May Rabbi Adinenu Harav Hakadosh Rabbeinu Chushiel. Right, that's who I heard it from. Reish Be'Rabbanan, the first of the rabbis. Right, and we also see this in the Shuvas Hagain. That's where he gets it from. So again, this is the backstory. The Gemara doesn't say it, but Rabbeinu Chananel also says something like this. The basic premise is he was owed money, and he's going to collect it now from the Aramis. She says, "Oh, here, sit on this. I'm He says, "I'm not sitting down on this thing until you pick up the bed." There we learn out that you're not allowed to sleep or to sit on the bed of an Aramis because it could be they're hiding a dead person there, and then they're going to blame you for killing the person. This is the three options of what it means, al teishu al mitas Aramis, which was part of the verklach that Rava was telling his children. The last thing that Rava had said was Val ta'avra misbalan. You're not allowed to go behind the shul when the time is that the tzibur is davening. This is a ride for Rabbi Shimon Levi. It's also to go behind the shul when the tzibur is davening. When's that talking about? Says Abaya only if it doesn't have another doorway. But if it has another doorway, less than. But that's obviously not a problem because it doesn't seem like you're a kaifer. It doesn't seem like you're giving a problem to the shul because it has the other doors. Maybe you're going from the other door. It's only true if there's no other shul in town. If there's another shul in town, again, less than. But again, as we said yesterday, about going to take extra psias to go to a shul farther away from you. So could be going to a different shul. What's the problem? Right, that's only if you're not carrying a burden. But if a person is carrying a burden, if a person is running somewhere, or he's wearing tefillin, and then those situations, obviously, it's not a void he's being careful in the shul. Of course, it's not a problem to be going achar bris knesses. Notice the structure of this Gemara. If you go back to Vavam and Beis, remember the Gemara Vavam and Beis, Rav Huna said in the middle of the wide lines, Rav Huna called Mechbal achar bris knesses, Nikra Rasha. Whoever davens behind the shul, right? This is not the same thing. This is Asaladim Sheyavar achar bris knesses. It's not a word of davening behind the shul. Here it's a word of walking behind the shul. And remember the structure there. What did happen? Right? Because the pasuk that Sav V'Sham Yasalechon Amar Abaya Lo Yamar and Ella. It's only if you didn't turn your head to the shul. If you turn your head to the shul, then it was not an issue. The exact same structure here. Rabbi Shimon Levi says, right, so the same two halakhas. They brought them both in the same place in Shulchan Aruch and Simon Tzadi, Archaim, same ideas. But again, you see the structure of the cute way you can remember is you have the basic ideas of walking behind the shul, and Abaya is coming qualifying what they are. Okay, we're at the two dots right now. Rabbi Akiva says he likes the Medes, right? The Persian Median Empire, he likes the Medes in three ways. Why? When they cut meat, they only cut it on the table, right? When they kiss, they only kiss on the hand. As Rashi says, why do they only give advice in the fields? The Amriyin people say, right? The walls have ears. The walls have ears, you heard it here, right? So what is the raya to that? The pasuk what does it mean? The pasuk says that Yaakov called Rachel and Leah to the field, to the sheep, and saying, "Look, my name, and all the things that Lavan has done to cheat me." So he called them out to the field to tell them that why? Because the walls have ears, and otherwise he can get into trouble. They would hear the plan of what they're trying to do. I should mention this idea of kissing, the kissing on the hand. That this is not a word for this week's parsha, but it is a word for next week's parsha and the parsha after that. There is a massive discussion in the Rishonim in the Midrashim. Pasuk parsha vayesei vayishak Yaakov l'Rachel vayisas kele vayevk. Right? Was it a neshiga shel tiflus or not? Right? Is it appropriate to be kissing a person that you meet now for the very first time? Remember, he hasn't even spoken to her. So the Ramban says, not an issue. Why? Because Rachel is a katana. She was very, very young, and it was okay for him to kiss her. That was number one. Number two, he says you can go with the Ibn Ezra. The Ibn Ezra writes that whenever it says Vayishak, it's not Ibn Ezra in this part in Vayetz, it's in Ibn Ezra in Parshas Toldos. Ibn Ezra says whenever it says in the pasuk Vayishak blank le, whenever there's a lamed, the lamed is not a neshika of tiflis, but rather it's a neshika on the head or on the hand. That is what the Ibn Ezra writes, and the Ibn Ezra writes that where he gets that from the pasuk where the pasuk is telling that Yitzchak was kissing Yaakov. He was trying to figure out who he is. Is this Esav? Is it Yaakov? So the pasuk says he thought it was Esav, right? And therefore he's willing to give Yaakov the bracha. The words are Vayigash Vayishak loy. The lamed says the Ibn Ezra im lamed biyada b'kasif. If it's with a lamed, it means that it was on the hand, etc. Or bitzavar, right? In appropriate places. If li lamed, but without a lamed, it will be bepet. Then it will be on the mouth. The Avi Ezra, the super commentary on the Ibn Ezra, says he disagrees with him, and he says that as we later on we'll see that the pasuk says that v'ayin Rashi Parshas Vayetze b'divrei Masay nashik loy, but Lavan's going and kissing Yaakov. It's to see Mem Shema Margoli is heavy v'heim befiv, and over there is a lamed v'ayin nashik loy. So what does it mean? It says he says even as it cannot be right, he puts in a line the whole divrei Rashi l'kuchem and amadrashim v'divrei harav b'tel and negda. The words of the Ibn Ezra are going to be batal next to Rashi. So he doesn't like Rashi, but the Ramban was good enough for the Ramban. It's good enough for us that sometimes we have kissing al gavayad, which is appropriate way. The Rebbe says that's the appropriate way to kiss. That is, not going to offend anybody's sensibilities. Okay, continues the Gemara. Kind of further adage to this idea from what Rebbe Kiva just said. Remember, the Persian Median Empire. So we just said about the Medians that we like. Now we're saying about the Persians that we like. What do we like about them? Ein Tzenuin. So Rebbe Kiva says, I like them about three things. They're Tzenuin, all the things that they do when it comes to eating and drinking, when it comes to Beis HaKisei, when it comes to areas of intimacy. Should point out that while Gamliel says this, that he likes them, this is actually connected to halacha. Right? The Gemara tells him Subas Memches that hu bevigda or he bevigda, if either one of the spouses require clothing, it's absolutely liable to be able to give a get in such a situation. And what's amazing is who's the man Amar over there that says that? That is Rabbi Yosef. That Rabbi Yosef says things there in Subas Memches shalei nag b'hem kaming hamarsim. You're not supposed to do what the Persians do. Now look here in this Gemara over here. The Gemara just says, Rabbi Gamliel says, I love them. Why? Because Rabbi Gamliel says they're tznuan, b'achila, b'beis hakisei, b'davar acher. And what's the next lines of the Gemara? Ani tzivisi l'mukdashi. What does it mean? Ani tzivisi l'mukdashi. I'm commanding my Kaddish ones. Tana Rabbi Yosef, elu aparsim hamukdashin umuzuman legehenim. This is actually a reference to those that are consecrated for Gehenim. And who is that? The Parsim. And who's saying the Memra? Rabbi Yosef, the very same Rabbi Yosef, who's the one who brings down Allah and Ksubas Memches, that anybody who is requiring clothing in areas of intimacy, they are to be divorced. So clearly, to my mind, the Masada Gemara is bringing down this Barn Rabbi Yosef, and that Gemara Ksubas Rabbi Yosef, you should understand this is a pushback on Rabbi Gamliel. What about Gamliel? How can Rabbi Gamliel's reasons for loving the Parsim? Remember, Gamliel is a istinus. We're going to find many times later in Brachot, Gamliel, he was able to bathe while he was sitting shiva because I'm istinus, right? He had certain proclivities towards that, so could be that this is why we get. But brought down halach and Ibn Ezra in Ayin Vav. The Mechaber writes, "I'm Yeshel ani bevigdi v'hi bevigda yeshivdik suba." It's if somebody has to be wearing clothing, it's ability to it's required to give a get. And I believe that that's the reason that is going on the interplay here between what Gamliel is saying and the actual halacha as Rabbi Yosef is bringing down. I should also point out that the idea about the bathrooms is not a negative. We actually do like that in halacha. And more later on, Brachot Chavav, and more is going to talk about the great bathrooms of the Persians. Right? They have sort of like what we have. Right? Our bathrooms, it has Gilal Sherei, but when you flush, it's gone. That's also how the Persian bathroom somehow they managed to work with electricity. They also were able to move things along. So that is a very nice aspect of of what the Persians did. It was, again, the only issue is to be Tanua and Achila, of course, to be Tanua and Beis Hakisa, of course. The only issue was in relation to Kiruv Basar, in relation to intimacy, where we have an issue with it in the halacha. Okay, we already over our time, so I will skip for the next Gemara for tomorrow. Okay.